Module 3b. Delivering services for youth who have been sex trafficked or commercially sexually exploited or are at risk to be. Trauma-responsive services and engagement with youth in residential placement settings will vary depending on the type of residential program.
Mary Cowan Bantle, Lifehouse. Dana Dorn, Milwaukee Academy.
I'm a program director at Lifehouse. So we're a nonprofit in Duluth, Minnesota that serves homeless and street-engaged young folks in a wide variety of ways. And one of those ways is we have 3 different housing programs that support commercially sexually exploited youth. One of those is a teen youth shelter that works with safe harbor and non-safe harbor youth. One is a program called Soul House. That's a 2-year transitional housing program with 24/7 staff. And the other is a program called Northern Lights, where youth have individual apartments. We work with 18 to 24-year-olds with up to 1 kiddo. And they have intensive case management that comes with that apartment. So I think when youth first move into a residential setting that specializes in working with commercially sexually exploited youth, the responses can really vary. Something that I've found is that oftentimes people who are new to working with young people who've experienced sex trafficking have this idea that youth will be so grateful, that they've been in this horrendous situation and they've been dying to leave, and as soon as they have a safe place to be, they'll be able to relax, they'll be able to open up, they'll be so glad, they'll be thanking us that they're there. And we found that that's not always the case. The dynamics of victims of trafficking are very complicated. They often have relationships that feel really conflicted and sometimes positive, sometimes really negative about the person who's caused them harm. And they often have had multiple experiences with adults in their lives where they have found that they cannot trust them. And so it is very typical that young people moving into our program may be closed off, they may be scared, they may feel angry, and that might come out in their behaviors. And I think the most important thing is that we do not take that personally. We understand that that is a response to their trauma, and the most important thing we can do as service providers is to be kind and consistent. And the longer we do that, the more we can build trust with them so that they can relax and start to let some of that armor down. That being said, I will say we also do have youth who come to our programs who are actively working on leaving the life and who are very relieved when they get there, and sometimes that can come down a little bit sooner. So it looks all different kinds of ways for different young people, but I think anticipating that when youth first move in, they might feel pretty scared and intimidated, and we might see some behaviors where youth are lashing out or putting up some pretty big walls.
I am the director for an all-female, gender-specific treatment center in Milwaukee. We have 28 beds, and this is a cohabitation. We have some girls who are here just for emotional behavioral work to do with us, trauma recovery, what have you. And we have about 10 of our beds are able to be programmed for specifically focused on commercial sexual exploitation. Some of our young people actually come identified. They're either self-identified or identified by their teams as needing that. Some are identified by their teams and are not ready to identify themselves that they've been victims of exploitation or victims at all of anything. Mary described the young folks coming in as being guarded and scared sometimes, and that is mainly what we see with our young people. It's not unlike the girls who are coming in general to residential, because residential is such a restrictive, high level of care. A lot of our girls are feeling like it's a lockdown, that they are being punished for something. So while we, as an agency and a program, work very hard to provide a safe and welcoming and calm environment, we're also ready, and anyone who is ready to work with these young folks needs to be ready for these young people to not be as excited about the safety. Their idea of safety looks very, very different to us. We feel like that they're here, they get their 3 meals, they're getting school, they're getting everything that most other teenagers have. But what's regular and normal to them is their survival on the streets. It's what they know, it's what they've been used to dealing with. So a lot of our young folks come in and they are feeling as if they need to be very guarded. And our staff have to be ready for our girls to fight back a little bit, push back, whether it's verbally, whether it's physically, whether it's them being very proud of the fact that they are in control of their lives. And Mary did state that some folks are really ready and they're tired. And the initial moments that they're in, they're very grateful, but then they can also go through some moments where they start to fight back a little bit as well. Because again, their idea of safety and familiarity is on the streets.
When I think about the question, what do youth need from residential care? I think that there are a lot of things that could go into this answer. One that comes to mind immediately is kindness and consistency. Youth need to know what to expect and have adults in their lives who are going to be kind and consistent with their support and also with their expectations. But another thing that comes to mind for me as I reflect on this question is something that a coworker said to me in my first few weeks on the job. So I've been working at Lifehouse for about 5 years now. And when I came in, I was the program manager for Soul House, which is housing specifically for young people who've experienced commercial sexual exploitation or trafficking. And a staff member who was still at Lifehouse and was formerly a part of that program, but had transitioned to another program, had said, "You know, Mary, I think you have one of the hardest jobs here." And I was surprised to hear her say that, and I probably kind of made a face like, "Oh, wow, you think so?" And she goes, "Well, the thing is that our safe harbor youth, it's like they're 6 years old because they've had their childhoods taken from them. It's like they're 16 because they are, and it's like they're 60 because of all the crap they've been through." And I think about this saying so often in the work that we do, and I think about this often when I think about the needs of young people who are in our program. As far as youth being 6, that can look a whole bunch of different ways, right? I think one of the ways I think about it is oftentimes youth haven't yet developed kind of the emotional capacity to handle their own emotions. We sometimes have youth in our program who throw temper tantrums when they get upset or things don't go their way. Or who might become really dysregulated when something is challenging or difficult in a way that we expect from someone younger than, their age. The other thing I think about is creating opportunities for young people in our housing programs to be children. They have had to be adults so much. And so creating space for them to have fun, for them to relax, for them to try new things, I think is just really, really important to that healing process and to creating a really safe and welcoming space for them. When I think about youth as 16-year-olds, I think about sometimes that in this work we get so focused on what we're afraid of for our young people. We know they've experienced credible harm. Oftentimes we are fearful about traffickers they might reconnect with, or dangers outside of our program or online that they might encounter as they walk through the world. And I think it's also really important to check ourselves and say, our young people are teenagers, and what is it that most teenagers are experiencing right now, and how can we create an environment where our teens are experiencing that too? So creating space for them to build healthy friendships where they're doing things that are fun, thinking about how teens engage with each other on their phones and social media, and are there safe ways to incorporate that and support our youth to do that in a way that's healthy? And expecting that they are going to push back on rules and expectations, and understanding when they're doing that in a way that's just really in line with where they should be in their own developmental process. It is really typical that teens are going to push back against adults or expectations in their lives as they're figuring out who they are in the world. And that last one about, youth being 60 and really having experienced a lot of life, I think it's really important that we recognize kind of the wisdom and the experience that youth bring to the program. They are the experts in their own experience, and it's important that we give that to them. They, in so many ways, our young people have had to be kind of wise beyond their years and grow up faster than they needed to. And I think it's important that we recognize that. I found that youth never enjoy being talked down to. And so, talking to youth like they understand and creating space for that, I think, is just really important. So that's some of what I think about when I think about needs of youth kind of in this demographic.
When I think of what kids need in residential care, that is a really loaded, I think, question in these times. We're all under different mandates and licensing regulations that say we have to provide A, B, and C. And so, of course, we do have to provide that kind of programming. But one of the things that I have learned is that we have to be very creative with that programming. Our kids come in the door, and a lot of our agencies and a lot of folks may expect for them to begin this work right away. They're going to jump into the program and start really working on their trauma recovery. And I think what to expect in the initial pieces of residential care is that you're building relationships. You're helping these kids feel safe in a completely different environment. They need to know that there are a lot of pieces of the program that are there, but they're there when they're ready. Meeting these young folks where they're at is important in general, because our teens are developmentally learning how to disengage from adults and disengage and get ready for the world. But these young people have also been through so much trauma and so much very scary things on the street that they are also young little people as well. And one thing that we've noted is allowing them the space to figure out how to express that. Oftentimes our staff are sometimes babysitting young people for a couple of weeks while they sleep most of the day. Their bodies are recalibrating from being out on the streets at night. They are trying to exercise any kind of control that they have, and oftentimes that could be sleeping. So I think that what to expect if from folks that when they come in the door is just about anything, and to not push them to be a part of the program right away, expecting them to get up, expecting them to do this and that. And what we've also experienced is allowing a lot of different forums for our young people to connect to. Whether it's groups or individual and therapy or what have you, and just letting the girls begin to engage in what feels best for them. We've also added a lot of experiences that are fun, and arts and crafts and music, and we have karaoke machines and anything that's going to allow our young people to start to begin to connect to themselves and to other people in a way that they've never connected before.
When I think about structure in our shelter and transitional housing program for Safe Harbor youth, it really feels like a balance. And I think that we really allow our pendulum to swing a little bit back and forth to meet the needs of current youth, because we really focus on individualized case management for each youth. So we're going to be offering education support, support connecting to mental health and wellness, employment, if that's something that a youth feels ready for. We do many similar things with every youth, but we really want their personal goals to be driving their ship. And so we do offer groups within our program focused on healthy relationships. We use the Not a Number group. We have community elders come in and lead support circles with our young folks, and art therapy, and then have structured time to have a family meal, to have structured time for youth who are doing online education to be able to work on that in the program. But really working on creating positive incentives for youth to attend instead of having negative consequences if they're not ready or choose not to attend. And I think really trying to allow youth to feel empowered to step in when they're ready, and really encourage them to do that, but also recognize, especially as a youth is transitioning into the program, that might feel really overwhelming, or they might have had something happen either with another youth in the program or outside of that feels difficult that day. And so just recognizing that and creating space for youth to positively and plug in and engage, but also recognizing that youth are sometimes going to need to step back.
When trying to create a program that balances a program structure along with supervision, we tend to notice that in the beginning phases of our young folks coming in, that we have to provide a little bit of a higher ratio to be able to not only supervise for safety, but also to allow our young people, if they need a break from the group structure, that they have someone to process with and bounce their thoughts and feelings off of. Oftentimes our girls have not been connected to other girls or other teenagers in a typical teenager fashion. They aren't used to being in a group structure where they are sharing, where they are talking about themselves, where they are allowed to just be. So sometimes that can be overwhelming. So if there is a group activity, whether it's math class or a treatment group or even just having fun, sometimes our girls need a break from that, and they need to be able to step back. They need to take a breather. Maybe there's some triggers. Maybe there's just too much stimulus. So we find that having more staff available to either guide the program structure or to help a young lady just step back from it. We oftentimes find that is a better setup for us and a setup for success for the kids to have a little bit more staff structure. So we keep our program running as is, but we really morph how we staff and how we structure our support for the girls throughout the program. When thinking of trauma-informed care that we are all, I believe, committed to and really understanding and learning more about every day, one of the pieces that usually seems so daunting to new staff or new folks creating a program or working with commercially sexually exploited youth is that there is some magic answer or some magic research out there that will help give the key to understanding trauma and working with our kids. And with trauma-informed care training is so important because it helps you learn the lens of each of the kids and how to view them. And so within our model, I've been doing this for a long time, and 30 years ago, it was a very outwardly controlled kind of way of managing residential care, guiding things with rewards and consequences and points for doing well and earning things. And part of understanding trauma recovery with kids is that balancing their successes with understanding that some behaviors have some consequences is much more likely to garner some change with our youth. Supporting their small successes, things like that, and understanding that each of our girls is going to respond to trauma very differently. Some may not be able to be a part of loud karaoke fun parties because sound and groups is a big trigger for them, so we need to understand that. Other kids might really struggle with touch or being in close proximity. So the trauma-informed care knowledge of kids and understanding the hierarchy of needs and safety and cognitive and social emotional development is so important, and it will be very, very different for each child. So each of the program pieces has to have some flexibility for our young people to learn about what triggers happen for them and how they can get through those triggers.
In our licensed program, Soul House in the Loft, we serve youth of all gender identities, male, female, and gender nonconforming youth. And I think that we often have this idea that primarily the victims of trafficking are young women. And we know from some recent studies in Minnesota that is not always the case, that male youth and gender nonconforming or transgender youth also are at risk for being trafficked or engaged in commercial sex. That being said, in our Soul House program, we primarily serve female youth. And I think that for a whole bunch of different reasons, that in our current cultural climate, that female youth are the most likely to self-disclose that this has happened to them, and they're the most likely to be identified by outside providers. So thinking about that, and also thinking about research that's been done on who is purchasing sex, and we know that in Minnesota, the majority of people purchasing sex are middle-aged married men. That we really want to be mindful of that dynamic. We also do a screen that asks young people if they feel more comfortable with staff members of a certain gender on intake, and we find that some youth say no, but if there is a preference, it's often a preference for feeling more comfortable with female staff. The majority of staff members in our program are female, but we do have gender nonconforming and male staff. And I think that is also actually really important. I think seeing male staff engage at Soul House, especially on shifts where we have 2 staff members available, and so, the large majority of that time, that second staff member is going to be female, really provides an opportunity for the young people in our program to learn that there are safe men in this world, in our community. There are safe men who want to support them in their healing process and who are going to be there, and they're going to be kind and consistent, just like female staff or just like gender nonconforming staff on our team. Something that we are very mindful of is part of our licensing requirement is that we do nightly checks, and so we actually have staff members go into youth rooms at night, and we do lots of talking to youth about why we do that, about that it's really about safety and having really open communication. And we're very mindful, knowing that there is research showing that people who purchase sex in Minnesota are predominantly men, that we really try to have female staff because that is a potential major trigger for young people. But I do think that there is absolute benefit to having staff members of all gender work with youth who've experienced commercial sexual exploitation, because they need to learn that there are people of all genders who are safe. I think that's an important part of that healing process.
One of the pieces I think of when we determined at Milwaukee Academy about the role of male staff within our program is that we did determine that having male staff is extremely important. Our young people, the one piece we need to remember, however, though, for both our male and female staff is that our males are going to need a different type of support from the female staff because our girls are coming in the door. And while they have endured and experienced abuse and trauma from females in their lives, the majority of times that they have been assaulted, abused, and purchased as a commodity have been by men. And so we have mostly female staff at Milwaukee Academy, but we are very careful to add men into the program as well. And the girls will meet these men right away. And we do now have gender nonconforming staff, which is fantastic as well for us, and new actually at the Academy. But the main thing to remember with male staff is that they're going to need some extra support and supervision to really understand the dynamics that our young people are going through here. So having male staff within your program is very important because our young people can learn how it feels and how it is to interact with healthy males who don't want anything from them, but for them to be successful. What I've found is our male staff really do well with supervision from our survivor leader that helps them understand some of what the girls are responding to them, how the girls are reacting. Because sometimes one of our female identified staff can give them a direction or ask them to do something, and they may say the same thing, and the girls really respond dramatically and aggressively sometimes. And our male staff need to be able to have someone to bounce that off of and maybe understand how to respond. The other piece that we've done has been very clear in some of the areas where our male staff are not a part of. They are not a part of the hygiene piece, the showering, the more intimate kinds of room checks and things like that. We really help our girls in their early stages of needing to process through some triggers and trauma responses. Our female staff are usually the ones that are helping them through that so that they can learn how to feel comfortable in the process. And then having our male staff be a part of that has been really helpful for our girls to get a male perspective after a while.
As I think about kind of particular ways to engage with young people who've experienced commercial sexual exploitation, I think at the core of the work that we do in our programs, and what I always come back to, is that we need to be providing opportunities for youth to be empowered and to take control back in their own lives. And so that can happen in really big ways and really small ways. But I think it is so important because young people who come through our doors have often had a huge loss of control over their lives. If they've been sex trafficked and have had a trafficker, not only is that trafficker likely controlling, who they are or aren't having sex with and when, but also when they're awake, what drugs or alcohol they're consuming, what they eat, who they get to see, who they get to talk to, what they wear. There is such control that happens in that dynamic. But even for young people who've had a different experience, maybe their exploitation was about, trading something sexual to meet a basic need, there's a huge loss of control in that experience. And so many of our young people have been systems involved from a very young age, either in the foster care settings or in the juvenile justice system, and have not had control, real meaningful control over their own lives. And so from the moment a youth walks in the door, we are being incredibly mindful to model that we want them to be the one leading their own lives. And what we're going to do is create a support system around them to help them do that. And so even when a young person walks in and we're doing an intake, I'm going to ask that young person, as long as those spaces are available, do you want to sit in the dining room or do you want to sit in the living room? Do you want something to drink? Do you want milk, juice, or water? Those things sound really, really small, but I think are small ways to model that we really genuinely care about youth having options in their own lives. We allow youth to choose their own bedrooms. We do not make our goal plans or what we call independent living plans without youth input. They are the one driving that ship. We want to know what their goals are and we want to help them meet those goals. And then I think being really transparent about program expectations, what they can expect from staff, and then being consistent is going to help youth feel in control of their own lives because they're going to know what to expect from us. So I think if that is at the heart of what you're doing when you're working with young people who've experienced commercial sexual violence, it's a really good foundation to be on.
I would say when thinking about a unique skill set that folks need to have to really engage with our youth, I would say whether you're a female staff, male staff, gender nonconforming staff, is listening. It's not so unique just to say to be a listener, but we have to meet our girls where they're at. And sometimes it is by just hearing them out and listening. One of the pieces that you have to do is listen without bringing your personal self into things. Oftentimes it feels like the girls are personally attacking. They are using their deep survival skills from when they were on the streets. So you have to be mindful that none of their responses are really about you at all. It is all of them trying to really understand themselves, and we are their sounding board. I think understanding that these young women are going to present as being very in charge of themselves, they are in control. That is all the pieces that they need to believe in the moment. And we have to go with that flow. Many times our new staff when our girls talk about their 30-year-old or their 40-year-old boyfriend, the protective parent comes out in them and they want to protect them and tell them there's no way anybody at 30 is going to be interested in you. They're just trying to hurt you. But to really go with where our young people are at has been the most successful at helping our girls figure out all the pieces that they need to for themselves.
Questions around implicit bias are really important when we're talking about working with a group of young people who experience marginalization in our culture. Because implicit bias, I think what's key is that it's implicit. It's not something that anyone is doing on purpose, but we live in a culture that is sending us certain messages about certain groups of people. It is really hard to kind of sometimes recognize when we're caught in that loop or when we're perpetuating a behavior or belief that we might not even realize that we have. And so I think it's really important to be having open and honest conversations about bias in the workplace. And I think it's really important to do that with kindness and care for one another. So we're inviting each other into the conversation, but also checking in and making sure that we're getting those foundational trainings about, the dynamics of sex trafficking. Because I think lots of us have, who have maybe some beliefs we didn't even recognize that we had about people who engage in commercial sex, for example. I think another place I think about implicit bias is, we disproportionately serve youth of color, and we could talk for a really long time about why that is. But so really making sure that we are paying attention to, if there is bias involved in any decision we're making with a youth. And sometimes when we're making decisions about how to respond, we so often work in the shade of gray. We're not always going to have the same response because not every youth has the same needs. But thinking about, would I be responding any differently, or when I've been in this same situation with a past youth with a different identity, have I responded differently, as kind of a self-check. I also went to a training a while back specifically about working with male survivors, and something that I found really helpful and also a little alarming was that presenter shared that the red flags that when we see in young women or sometimes trans youth as a potential that they are being sex trafficked, when we see those same red flags in young men, there are so many providers who make the assumption that they're engaged in perpetrating commercial sex, that they're trafficking or recruiting, as opposed to being a victim. And for me, that was a huge aha moment to realize that I might have some bias that I need to look at when I'm working with young people. And so it's not about being a good or a bad person. And so I think the most important thing to do is to remain open, to always be learning.
Right at the beginning, I work with our survivor leader who does the groups with the girls here. She joins me for about a 2 to 3 hour opening training that really just lays the groundwork for working with young folks with a history of being trafficked or at risk. And it really opens up a discussion piece of where folks are at in understanding their own of what is sex trafficking. Who are the purchasers? Who are the victims? What have you? And that has been very helpful for new staff to really open the door to understanding the basic foundation of working with these young people. Our survivor leader also does ending the game training with all of the staff. And that is a really deep dive into biases. It goes deep into understanding a lot of what the victims of trafficking have experienced and how they themselves have been empowered to get out of the life. And so those two pieces of training are really important for people to have. It almost helps uncover biases that staff may not have even realized they had, and really take a look at it, dive deep into it, and have a safe space to be able to explore with a group of their colleagues on how to best work with these young people.
Questions about self-disclosure are really important, and it's important that people who work in programs together are on the same page. And I think that when we talk about self-disclosure, it's really a spectrum. Really, it's about sharing anything about ourselves. So on one end of the spectrum, we have what's our favorite color? Do we like ice cream? Do we have pets at home? And on the other end of the spectrum, we have some personal experiences that might be exactly that, really personal. Do we have shared experiences of homelessness, of sexual violence, of being in recovery, and what is and isn't appropriate to share with young people? And so I think that we found that it's foundational that we are building relationships with young people. And part of building a trusting relationship is a healthy amount of disclosure on this end of the spectrum, letting youth know that we're human, listening to the things they care about and like, but also giving them a little bit about, a little bit about our lives to build that relationship. But I think when we get over to this end of the spectrum, that's really about kind of those deep personal things in our own life, at the core, always, we need to ask, is it in the best interest of our youth for me to share this? And then if we decide that it is, then I think it's really important that we are only sharing what is absolutely necessary to benefit that youth. And so I think that there are times, particularly when a youth is struggling with something specific and we've had a shared struggle, that it can feel potentially beneficial. But if we do that, we should share as little information as possible, because of the risk that youth will will want to carry us instead of us carrying them, right? So our relationships with young people are not friendships that are mutual. We are support people for our young folks. And if our young folks know about enough of our hurt that they feel like they need to care for us, it can be really damaging. And on the other hand, our young people are often engaging in keeping themselves safe. That's, they have all kinds of methods that they use to keep their hearts safe. And they might feel like they need to care for us, but they also might find a soft spot or a place where we experience triggers that when they are angry or upset or feeling triggered themselves, that they might push on. And so we always need to be aware that when we share something with a youth, that youth might tell another youth, that youth might throw it back in our face. And we do not get to take that personally because we decided to share it with them and we are the support person in that relationship. So I think that is always the core question. And I've found that being in youth work for a long time and having a lot of colleagues with a lot of expertise, it is really on the rare occasion that we decide to self-disclose on the heavier end of that spectrum.
One of the most important pieces about working with trafficked or at risk for being trafficked youth is having someone that has lived that life to be able to understand how they can get out of the life. Our staff and all of the different angles that we come from in helping our kids through education and therapy and what have you is very, very beneficial. But one of the key pieces to the success of our girls getting out of the life is having our survivor leader here. Our survivor leader leads what she calls the Next Steps group, and she has really purposefully designed that group to be, yes, we're going to talk about what happened to you, what experiences you had, but she really likes to take that experience and talk to the girls about what is next in life. How can we utilize what happened to be successful? And one of the biggest pieces of her work is her own self-disclosure. And so her self-disclosure is one that the girls learn very quickly is very much like their own. And so we very purposefully have our survivor leader who's there for the girls, for crisis management, for group, what have you. So we're very purposeful that our survivor leader is that person giving them that real life experience. When thinking about preparing for triggers for our girls, in understanding trauma-informed care, we cannot always prepare for triggers. Sometimes our girls aren't really even aware of what pieces of life and residential care can trigger them. I would say one of the most important pieces that we don't think about is that our program as a whole, in our creation of trying to help our young people learn new skills, could be a trigger in and of itself. The rules that we have, the getting up in the morning, the expectations, the way maybe that you help a young person know what's next in their day, we have to be very careful not to replicate the rules and the control that their traffickers had out in the world. And that may seem really odd to think about, that our program could be replicating all these rules out on the streets. But when we think of our young people, they have been groomed to feel like they had such a free life and they're very control in everything and they were in charge. There were very, very strict rules that they had to survive by. They look very different. And we may be saying, well, this is the healthy way that you need to learn how to survive life. But we have to be very mindful that our very, very program structure can be very triggering to the girls. And we need to be prepared for that. We need to be prepared they're going to fight back getting up for school for a while. We need to be prepared they're going to fight back by being told what's next in their day. And if we go into that understanding that anything and everything could trigger our young people, we'll be prepared for them.
I think it's really important to recognize that anything can be a trigger. And so we just need to be prepared to respond and recognize that we might find a youth's trigger unintentionally, and to be able to support them through that. But I will say some really common triggers of youth in our program include being touched, especially without consent. So I think that there are ways that, and maybe less so in a post-COVID world, but that just as part of connecting as a human, we might, touch someone on the shoulder as we walk past them, in a hallway or something like that. And that's really something that we avoid doing in our programs that we know is very likely a trigger for a lot of our youth. And anniversaries as a trigger. So anniversaries related to experiences with their trafficking, anniversaries related to loss or, being taken from their home if they've been engaged in foster care, is something that we've really noticed. And so if something is coming up for a youth and we're seeing that they're not themselves, they're withdrawing, or lashing out, and we can't really put a finger on what might be happening, oftentimes we'll then ask, are we near the anniversary of anything that's happened in the past? And that's been really common.